Good morning. My name is Darlene Payne, and I am the lay chaplain here, and I'm very pleased to be able to do this presentation today. Welcome to everybody who is in their homes. The theme that I chose for this presentation was looking back. We can see things clearly, and what formerly appeared to be challenges now appear to be blessings. I chose this theme because in the years I have been a lay chaplain, I have changed and grown, and it has been a journey and quite a blessing. The dictionary describes or defines a celebrant as a person who performs a rite or performs an official or formal ceremony. Here in the UU Church, the lay chaplain is really a celebrant, helping families navigate a naming ceremony or child dedication, a wedding, or a memorial service or celebration of life. We don't really get into the spiritual needs of a family or minister to them along the way a chaplain would in a hospital. But we do nurture our own spirits. When I took on the role of a lay chaplain, of course, I had some doubts about myself. Sure, I could talk in front of a bunch of people. I was a teacher. And as we know, some teachers can get pretty passionate about their subject areas and talk on. I taught history, social studies, English. So if anybody needs to know about orographic effect, just let me know. My fear, though, was more about how to create a meaningful service, how to find just the right words to say. The lay chaplain training was terrific. The resources that were given to us were excellent. But imagine yourselves standing in the aisle, the Hallmark card aisle at the drugstore, the array of cards before you, and you're trying to find the right card with the right verse to convey just what you want it to say. Not too sentimental for this person, but mushy and over the top for another person, because that's just what you need to say to them. Greeting card verses are brief, but in a ceremony you need much more. So the challenge of a deep dive, if you will, into poetry was a challenge I was happy to follow. Thank goodness for the poets in this world. They help us to say the things that we cannot put into words. Last Tuesday was World Poetry Day. Thea Votiratris wrote in Poetry for Political Change, "From the 18th century Augustan poets to the American beat movement, poetry has been used as a form of resistance through history. Poets have used their voices to push back against unjust government structures, societal norms and expectations, institutional oppression, and so much more." The work of the 19th century poet, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, was praised for taking on social injustice, such as the slave trade, child labor, and women's rights. Her work later influenced the likes of Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson. The 20th century brought us strong political poets, including James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou. The work of these poets and many others has left a lasting impression on American society, pioneering the Harlem Renaissance and underscoring the civil rights movement. I was listening to CBC, and Marcy Marcusa was interviewing Winnipeg's own poet laureate, Chimwenwi Undi, and she spoke of the comfort and joy of what words can do, what poetry can create, and what power poems wield. This is why we pull out poetry for the important events and times. I'm sure everyone remembers Amanda Gorman, the poet laureate of the United States, who performed at the inauguration of Joe Biden. Her poem, "The Hill We Climb," the final lines say, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. if only we're brave enough to be it. Her performance will be the lasting highlight, a lasting memory of that day. As I said, I taught social studies, English, and visual arts, and poetry was always a favorite, but doing poetry with middle school students is sometimes a challenge. Though really Shakespeare and the sonnets really have to be read out loud to be understood. But I was teaching American history, and so I turned to the poets to create the atmosphere. Phillis Wheatley, one of the best-known pre-19th century poets, had been taken from Africa, possibly Senegal, though they're not sure, to America as a young girl and sold into slavery. A Boston tailor named John Wheatley bought her, and she became his family servant. In a short poem, her most famous lyric, Phillis Wheatley reminds her white readers that although she is black, everyone, regardless of skin color, can be refined and join the choirs of the godly. Although Phillis Wheatley was required to perform domestic duties, she was also taught to read and write. Her body of work served as proof that Black people could be artistic and intellectual, and it helped the abolitionist movement gain early traction. World War I poet Wilfred Owen creates a tone for the horrors of a chlorine gas attack in Dulce Decorum Est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and toward our distant rest began to trudge. If I were still in a history classroom today, I would use the poetry of Rosanna Deerchild, the host of CBC Radio's Unreserved. She comes from the Opeepon-na-Piwan Cree Nation at South Indian Lake in northern Manitoba. Her poetry collection, Calling Down the Sky, is about the impact of the residential school system on her mother and how the experience affects families over generations. In one poem, she writes of how her mother as a child had her braids cut off on the first day of school. On the first day, all of us kids had to do it, eh? A lot of us cried, huddled together like sheep, bleating and pushing, trying to melt into each other, more scared than we've ever been. One by one, peeled off, taken into a little room, us left behind, catch a glint of a sharp edge, hear the crying before door closes. Some never had it done. Their long, perfect braids, a measure of seasons, an umbilical cord to mama. Later in the poem, she writes, boys, buzzed bald like dandelions, blown of all their wishes. In another poem, Two Braids, she writes of how on her own first day of kindergarten, Rosanna's mother weaves two braids so tightly as if they will never let go. Memories entwined of her first day at residential school. This is powerful imagery, powerful memories, and I believe creates a sacred space in a classroom to begin a study of our past. Frederick Ennis and Laura Turnbull did a presentation during a Sunday service about the Virtues Project. This was a number of years ago. Virtues are our inner strength, the content of our character, and the truest expression of ourself. Respect, integrity, justice, and trustworthiness, just to name a few examples. Values are culture-specific, while virtues are universally valued by people of all cultures. Virtues are the common thread that unites humanity. I had begun to use that book the virtues projects for teachers in my classroom as part of a character education program, talking about the virtues and how my middle school students could examine what courage is, for example, and what it looks like and sounds like, and how they could use it in their lives. When, as a lay chaplain, I was asked to create a naming ceremony, this immediately came to mind, and I asked the parents, what virtues do they want to nurture in their children? Which ones were the most important to them? And how do they want their families and their friends to help them with this task? I had a set of the cards, 52 of them, and I gave them to the parents for a month, and they got to read them and talk about them with each other, and I asked them to choose 5 for the ceremony. They reported back that they had never had such deep conversations about their own values to discover which virtues were the most important and why, and which ones they shared, and of course, which virtues they wanted their child to be raised with. It was amazing to have these conversations. But of course, readings and poems would be part of the ceremony, and so on to books and online sources I went until I found the one. And it is so you, and I'll share it with you now. It's by Nicolette Sauder. May we raise children who love the unloved things, the dandelion, the worms, and the spiderlings. Children who sense that the rose needs the thorn, and they run into rain-swept days the same way they turn towards sun. And when they're grown and someone has to speak for those who have no voice, may they draw upon that wilder bond, those days of tending tender things, and be the ones. Weddings, by their very nature, make a very charming day, from meeting the couple, getting to know them, asking so many questions and listening to the answers, and then looking for the perfect reading that reflects them. Would it be a poem by Margaret Atwood, Rumi, Khalil Gibran, E.E. Cummings, John O'Donoghue, the Romantics, Shakespeare, biblical, if that's what's needed and wanted? Rumi, a moment of happiness, you and I sitting on a veranda, apparently 2, but 1 in soul, you and I. We feel the flowing water of life here, you and I. With the garden's beauty and the birds singing, the stars will be watching us, and we will show them what it is to be a thin crescent moon. You and I, unselfed, will be together. For the scientists who were married in their backyard, an anthropologist and a geomorphologist, the perfect poem was found in a book of poetry by Margaret Atwood called Habitation. Marriage is not a house or even a tent. It is before that and colder. The edge of the forest, the edge of the desert, the unpainted stairs at the back where we squat outside eating popcorn. The edge of the receding glacier where painfully and with wonder at having survived even this far, we are learning to make fire. Maybe it's the lyrics of a song. The song that bonded a young couple back when they were in junior high. This young couple, now grown, married during the pandemic in the living room of our church. This young couple whom no one wanted to marry because one of them was transitioning. They found us. And because of who we are as UUs, there was a will and a way to create a ceremony so they could be legally married. An excerpt from a poem read that day by James Kavanagh says, "To love is not to possess, to own or imprison, nor to lose oneself in another. Love is to join and separate, to walk alone and together." And this section is the most important part, I think. To find a laughing freedom that lonely isolation does not permit. It is to be finally able to be who we really are. no longer clinging in childish dependency, nor docilely living separate lives in silence. It is to be perfectly one's self, and perfectly joined in permanent connection to another and to one's inner self. That poem took a while to find, but the couple found it perfect. Their families who were there, just their parents on each side, supporting them and loving them, asked to have a copy of the poem. The power of poetry again. As a child, I was never too comfortable going to wakes and funerals. What do you say? It was scary. To go and sit in a house with aunties and grandparents, visiting the neighbor family after their son died by drowning at Grand Beach. Open coffins. Of course, as a grown-up, I had the death of my husband to inform me how it feels to be the center of the circle of grief. The passing of both my parents, aunties, and uncles. But now, a lay chaplain, meeting families going through grief, and my job was to create a meaningful ceremony. And again, the poets were there to support me. Someone had given me a poem that has stayed with me. It is by the poet Patricia McKieran Runkle. I use this as a centering poem before I visit a family. Slip off your shoes and set them by the door. Enter barefoot this darkened chapel, hollowed by loss, hallowed by sorrow. Its gray stone walls and floor, you, congregation of one, are here to listen, not to sing. Kneel in the back pew, make no sound, and let the candles speak. Lorraine Stokes, a lay chaplain at the Unitarian Church of Vancouver, shares my feelings quite well. She says to be a lay chaplain is to sit with people who have lost loved ones and to listen to them without judgment, to give them time to introduce this person to me and discover new ways of talking about them. Loss is not easy, and it is complicated and messy. It is a gift to have someone sit and listen, to have someone that receives memories and emotions without judgment, to have gentle promptings that brings to mind the best of the person who has just passed away. On the day of the memorial, to be a force of presence on the stage to draw the mourners into a space and time where they are present with each other, building acceptance, a space where they can remember in community with each other, where they can see how their life has been shaped by the person who has died and find a way to move forward. The poems of Wendell Berry, Mary Oliver, are those that have been the most chosen and comforting to families and to myself during these times. So now I want to introduce you to just a few of the people I have met along this journey. Margaret. The first person who I met had her celebration of life at the St. Norbert Arts Center. She was in her mid-80s when she passed. She had 4 children and raised them in the Northern Ontario bush. As her husband was an electrician who set up the electrical plant for the mines, she planted gardens, vegetables, and flowers. She always planted honeysuckle and roses, things that were highly scented. She was a trained pianist, and now she was living in the bush. But she kept playing. She taught her children and then her grandchildren how to play. After her husband passed, she spent 3 months of the year with each of her children. At her celebration of life, each of those grandchildren played a piece that their grandmother had taught them and argued that their piece had been Grandma's favorite. We released ladybugs in the garden of the Arts Center. The amazing thing about Margaret was that she was legally blind. From a young age, her husband strung ropes from the house to the well, to the well, to her garden, to the lake, to the clothesline, so that she could navigate around her garden. And the scent of the honeysuckle and roses gave her comfort, the scent of home. She managed. Not only did she manage, but she thrived. Leola was a neighbor I had not yet met. Her daughter is a good friend of a member of this congregation, and I had met her daughter, Michelle. She asked to have her mom's service here, and I went to meet the family. We sat around Leola's dining table, we had coffees and cookies, listened to stories, and took notes. I looked out at her garden covered in snow and the bird feeders, and it felt so homey. Her life and possessions, the things and people that mattered to her were all here. You begin to get the gnomon, and well, I wish I had known her. At her service, our sanctuary here was full, like full. The eulogy by her daughters, a poem by Mary Oliver, the song written and sung by her son were truly touching. Yeah, I wish I had known her. I was looking out at the gathered community, and I realized that oh my gosh, I know that woman. She's a member of our Buy Nothing club here in River Heights. And then, oh, that's the person that walks the dog Ollie I see all the time. And the children. There were so many children here, not just grandchildren, but her neighbor children. I finished my closing words with something to the effect that I wish I had been her next door neighbor. After the service and over coffee, a woman came up and said that she had been her next door neighbor for 10 years, and yes, it had been wonderful. The little kids said that they lived across the street from her, and Leola never missed their birthdays, sent them Valentine cards, and baked for them. All of her neighbors were here, and the stories were great. My 2023 goal is to be more like Leola. Beryl, a nurse for 56 years, the longest-serving RN in our province's history. She emigrated from Britain in the 60s. Having grown up during World War II as a child, she lived through the Blitz. She brought with her grit and determination. We've been through tough times, she would say. We'll get through this. Or keep calm and carry on. And finally, the story of Jim. Again, I feel I missed out not knowing him. Having a friend like Jim, his sister and brother spoke so highly of their big brother, a man who looked out for them, looked out for his EIA clients, advocating for them to get additional training for work, for housing. Shortly before he passed, he was waiting for a blood test in the hospital waiting room. A young couple came in, newcomers to this country. She was in labor. But through the jigs and the reels, their health card had lapsed, and they had not filled out an extension form or something to that effect, and the admitting clerk requested payment before she would admit them. This woman is in labor. Jim overheard, and he was outraged. How do you treat people like that? He asked of the clerk, but she didn't budge in her position. Jim took out his credit card, and he paid what the couple owed. The couple was amazed and asked why he would do such a thing. He showed him the picture of his newborn grandchild. The soon-to-be mother kissed the image. How would they ever be able to repay him? You can. Just pay it forward someday. This was a man I would have liked to have met, but I feel I now know. I could talk about the memorial service for Beth Pito, but many of you were here. We held space for her. We left our lives outside the doors of the sanctuary, and we focused on Beth. Ellen Newman, who as the chair of the National CUC Lay Chaplaincy Committee and former lay chaplain at the Unitarian Congregation in Mississauga, said, "The sharing is beautiful and insightful. It is a humbling, transcendent experience as a lay chaplain to witness grief and to hold space. It is at the core of what many lay chaplains see as their personal growth and spiritual development in the role. And I encourage anyone seeking such to consider serving as a lay chaplain." So, to wrap this up, from searching for the right verse on a card, to a deep dive into books of verse, and many long sessions on the computer reading poetry, it has been a blessing in learning. From nervousness at sitting down with the family deep in grief, to now a feeling of honor at being allowed into their grief to a seat at the table. It lessens the fear of my own death. Well, maybe not quite, but we'll see about that. Carl Sagan said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "If you want to lead a meaningful life, do things that are meaningful." And this has been a meaningful journey. Thank you very much.